The most recent scandal that has been following the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is that he wore blackface on a number of occasions prior to getting into the political game. But I'm wondering, is this now politically fatal for the Prime Minister?
Probably not. It's certainly damaging. It's damaging because it goes to questions of his character, it goes to questions of his authenticity, particularly when he's made diversity and tolerance and inclusion such watchwords of his government. To have had this waiting in the background, which he would have known about and not told anybody, it's very damaging to his credibility. It also is harmful to anybody in a campaign when you have to waste several days of your campaign dealing with a scandal rather than getting the message out that you'd like to get out. So on both those counts, it's definitely damaging. Is it fatal? Probably not, because a lot of this would be priced in, as they say. A lot of people would have made up their minds about Justin Trudeau long before this, either for him or against him. And there'd be a comparatively small number of people who would change their minds about him and his government only because of this.
Mm-hmm. Do you accept their, I guess, apology strategy that he's come out and said, yes, it's racist, yes, I'm sorry, it was under the guise of privilege? Do you accept that? I guess, do you accept his apology and taking a look at that strategy? What do you think?
Well, I'm certain he's sorry. I'm certain, and I don't mean that in a totally cynical way. I mean, he's not just sorry to get caught, as they say. He's also, I'm sure, terribly embarrassed and humiliated and ashamed of himself. Who wouldn't be? It's a very human reaction. At the same time, there's a natural tendency for anybody in politics, and it seems to be particularly with this fellow, to want to try to find ways to wriggle out of it. So even in his first apology, there were things about, well, there was only one other incident. Turns out there were many more. And in the second round of apologies the next day, he elevated this question of, well, I was blinded by my privilege, which sounds like a very searching self-examination, but it really isn't. What it's basically saying is, well, you know, my race and class made me do it, not any individual failing on my part. It wasn't because I'm a show-off who always wants to be the center of attention, or because I'm particularly clueless when others of my generation would have known for certain that this is just something you don't do in 2001, let alone 2019. So he's kind of mastered this of taking his own individual failings and spreading them out to society at large. You remember when he was accused of having groped that young female reporter, it became sort of a teaching moment for all of us. And as for his involvement, all he could say was, well, we might have experienced things differently, which is, again, not really either a denial or an apology.
I'm curious to get your take on whether or not, at this point, he should be stepping down and letting somebody else lead this party.
I think at this stage it's just not doable. The damage to the party from that would be just so enormous relative to just riding it out. And it's just, I can't think of an example of when somebody just stepped down in the middle of the campaign. There was once in 1988, they almost tried to push John Turner out in the middle of the 1988 campaign, and it did him enormous harm. So no, I can't see that happening.
The sentiment out of Quebec doesn't seem to be one, I guess, of this. You know, he's a racist, he's a fraud. It's more so he got dressed up.
Yeah, I'd be careful of that a little bit. The one caveat I put in that is oftentimes the French media, the Quebec media, isn't necessarily representative of the Quebec population at large. We've seen this time and time again where, and that's true with the rest of the country as well, the media doesn't always represent where public opinion is. So that's the caveat. The second point would be, to the extent that that is true, it makes Quebec an outlier not just within the country but within the world. The whole world is flabbergasted that a leader of a Liberal Party particularly, who'd made such a profession of his sensitivity in these matters, who came from a almost aristocratic family, with all of the advantages, all of the education, all of the supposedly travels and things where you'd have opportunity to sort of break out of those kinds of backwards ideas, would still not know in 2001 that this was, or indeed up to 2008, he says, when he became an MP, that this was just not on to behave that way. The whole world is just astonished by this. It would be astonishing if he'd done it once. It's utterly astonishing that he seems to have made a hobby of it.
Is this overshadowing what the other, I guess, party leaders want to be doing or hope to be doing, which is highlighting, issues that are ultimately important to all Canadians: deficit, taxes, student debt in general, affordability, pharmacare? Is this detracting from that?
Well, there's no doubt that you know, for a few days there, we sucked all the oxygen out of the campaign. And yes, if you had a big message you wanted to get across as another leader for a couple of days, you were harmed in that as well. Yes, I don't think they minded. I don't think you mind when an opponent is, you know, self-immolating. But it does some harm to the campaign at large, shall we say. I mean, this is obviously not the only issue in the campaign, what Justin Trudeau did in the past. Some people say it's not an issue at all. I don't agree with that. But it's, for a while there, it prevented discussion of the campaign's programs, et cetera. There's no doubt he's done himself a lot of damage. If you're an opposition leader, you don't mind that, but at the same time, it means they're not able to talk about their programs and their platforms for the duration of that. And to some extent, that harms the campaign at large if we're not able to discuss those questions. But those who say, well, this is just a matter of Justin Trudeau's character, or some people say it's not an issue at all, but some people say, well, maybe it's an issue about his character, but now let's get back to talking about the real issues. I don't think you can make such a neat separation. The character and credibility of a leader goes to everything in his record and everything in his platform. If we can't trust him or believe him, what use are his promises? How much weight should we attach to them? And we've seen with this Prime Minister and with previous Prime Ministers, it's a question for all leaders is, why should we trust you? With Justin Trudeau's case, there were some pretty major promises made in the last campaign that he simply ditched when they were inconvenient. The balanced budget, the electoral reform, et cetera. With the SNC-Lavalin affair, there was pretty clear that he did not tell the truth about significant events in that whole scandal. So there's been questions about his character already. This reinforces that, and I think while we all want to also talk about the future of the country and what the party's programs are, we have to be able to trust and believe in our leaders. Can
they shift the narrative?
Political party leaders, governing parties in particular, have enormous ability to set the agenda. If you outline a big platform plank, chances are people will start to pay attention, at least after the first 48 hours. There's no doubt there was a period there where you couldn't get anything out. But people feel squeamish, for example, talking about this stuff beyond a certain stage. I think the danger for the Liberals is there more? Do we hear further revelations either on this front or on other fronts that are damaging to their leader? One hears talk that there's other things out there, and we'll just have to see, because that can then become a continuing disruption to your ability to build any kind of momentum. The other thing is, these sorts of events have two types of impacts. It's just like SNC-Lavalin. SNC-Lavalin had an immediate impact where support for the party went down very significantly. People just said, I'm really fed up with this. Then over time, people forget, and events go on and they start to come back in the polls. But there's a second type of damage, which is more long-lasting, which is through people's perceptions of the trustworthiness and credibility of the leader. And that's the more worrisome thing, I think, for the Liberals is, what's the longer-term damage in terms of the way in which people perceive Justin Trudeau and the way in which they perceive everything else he's saying during the campaign. And if he becomes either untrustworthy or becomes a figure of fun, these kinds of things aren't helpful to your ability to be an asset for your party. Remember, in 2015, that's what won them the elections. People took a look at Justin Trudeau and said, okay, let's give this guy a chance. He's not going to be that kind of asset, to say the least, in this campaign, and the question is just how much of a liability has he become?